Welcome everyone to another episode of the Quad Damage Podcast. I'm Robert from HyperVerse, and joining me as usual is High Functioning Medium. Unfortunately, Deadforge could not be here with us for today's episode, but we're sure he's here in spirit, not physically, so there won't be an apparition behind me. Today we're joined by the developer of one of the crunchiest, most head-explodey boom shooters to come out in the last few years, and one which many think is in contention for a GOAT nod. It's Cultic's dev Jason of Jasozz Games. Did I pronounce that right? Or was it Jasozz?
No, you got it.
Excellent. I've heard it pronounced both ways, so I was kind of nervous about how I was going to say it.
It's better than what I was going to say,
it.
which is Jasozz. I was like, I don't.
That's I'll take that too.
Sweet.
What, as in like ketchup sauce?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
The secret sauce.
Yeah, let me move that up there. Excellent. So at least it provides a bit of lighting from this
Thanks
side.
for joining us, Mr. Jason.
Yeah.
Much appreciated.
Absolutely.
Yeah, appreciate it. Yeah. How's life been since the release of Cultic for you?
Busy. It's been pretty crazy since Cultic came out. It was pretty much like Cultic dropped in, what was that, October of 22? And then after like about a month of doing like patches and bug fixing, I would just had no desire to touch my computer or game dev for probably like 3 months.
Wow.
Yeah, and then I had a wedding to plan, and then I was doing some graphic design work for 3D Realms, and it was a busy year. 2023 was really busy, and then now I'm finally getting to put some quality time into Chapter 2, which has been nice.
Well, I'm happy to hear that it's obviously been a colossal success. Numbers are obviously your own private business, but in terms of the reception to it, have you? Everyone has been not just positive about it, but I mean, people are calling it like one of the best boom shooters of the last few years, up there with Turbo Overkill and other well-received games. Has there been any kind of? I haven't heard anything negative about it. Have you heard anything kind of constructive criticism, or has it literally been like, yeah, this is good, you know?
Yeah, I mean, there's there's obviously negative reviews of the game out there, and people who have some issues with it. The biggest thing has been basically kind of just like the comparison game. I find that a lot of the negative feedback towards the game has been that that it's not enough like other games, and most notably, of course, Blood. I think a lot of people get into the game because somebody tells them that it's a lot like Blood, and then they expect the exact same kind of game, and then they're really disappointed when it's not. Which is understandable. That was a really difficult thing to fight with the marketing of the game, especially because there are like Blood does have some influence on this title, obviously. Blood's one of my favorite games. And there are mostly like aesthetic and like thematic influences there, but the gameplay and like the overall tone are much different, and I think that throws some people for a loop. And then I think probably the most common complaint otherwise has been there's some people that absolutely hate the color palette, which is fair. That's why you can turn it off. A bold artistic choice like that isn't always gonna gonna mesh with some people, and that's okay. That's why you can turn it off.
I think it's
it is. Yeah, I played kind of half the game with the standard color palette, and then I turned it off just out of curiosity, and finished the other half with it. But it's so odd though, and when you look at it, you're like, am I going to be able to tell anything on his? But yeah, everything is so
readable,
easy to see, and defined on that. I didn't have I mean, you can pull off headshots in this from guys that are 100 meters away. It's quite surprising how easy it is to be able to make everything out on there. But you mentioned Blood was an inspiration to you, but what kind of, going back to like the very beginning, what inspired you to actually make the game in the first place? Was it like a books, or was it a movie or something like that?
I think there's there's a lot of elements to this game of other games that I played growing up that I really liked. Like the build engine games are definitely part of it, and then like Dark Forces 2 is a big inspiration. Is in terms of like 3D world design and verticality and traversal. And so there's a lot of elements of lots of different games that I like that I've always kind of wanted to put together. And I've had the kind of general idea for Cultic for a really long time, but I didn't even get into 3D game development at all until 2016 or so. That's when I like started learning Unity and started learning C# and started learning 3D modeling and texturing, and so just pretty much until the end of 2020 when I finally started working on this, I didn't really feel like my skills in 3D modeling and 3D game development were at a point where I would do my idea justice. Like every time because I tried to start on this game a few times, and every single time I would kind of get there to the point where I had like some very basic mechanics down, and then I just didn't like the way that the game looked and the way that it felt. So I would just put it back down. And then I was messing around with just kind of like a little artistic experiment of turning 3D models into 2D sprites using a limited palette. And I thought it looked pretty cool, so I posted it on Twitter and was like, hey, look at this thing I'm messing with. And I got like the amount of engagement I got on those tweets versus what I would normally get. It was like a 20 times increase. It was like normally I'd get like 5 or 10 likes on a post I do on Twitter, and then I posted this pixel art or this model sprite conversion stuff, and it was like 200, 300 likes, and I was like, oh, I think I'm onto something here. And so that's kind of where it took off from, was like, I think I finally found the art style that I've been looking for this. And even that art style has evolved so much from, the early days of working on the game.
When you first start a game and you define kind of, what its art style is and the mechanics and that sort of thing, do you have to be forced to kind of stick with that, or does it change throughout the course of the game? Because I would imagine once you've defined your art style, the development of a game is a very long time, and that your creative process is like, actually, I want to change this a little bit. Do you have to force yourself to kind of stick with the initial art style that you created?
I suppose it depends on your development resources. I imagine for most games out there that have a team and a budget and a deadline, a radical change in the art style isn't really something that you can do. But you have like even Fortnite had a huge change in their art style. If you go and look at like some of the old character art from the pre-release days of the Save the World mode, it's like a very different looking game. It's got a very different art style. And then once they started to bring that to Battle Royale, they really kind of changed and unified the designs of the characters and everything. And so even a game as big as that is capable of having its art style changed. But I am sure that was a large undertaking, and probably a lot of artists working a lot of overtime to get that implemented. But for Cultic, the art style, the changes were a lot more gradual and not quite as radical. Probably the biggest difference is in the earliest demo of the game that I first sent to 3D Realms when we were first kind of starting to talk. It ran in 256 by 144 was the resolution, so it was obscenely pixelated. The color palette had 32 colors in it. Whereas the current color palette has 45, I think. So it was a lot more limited color-wise, and it was much slower paced, and it was a very crusty game. The enemy sprites, I think, were maybe 80 by 80 pixels. They were pretty small. And then as the game started to evolve and started to turn, I wanted to have more mid and long range combat and not have everything be quite so up close and personal, which meant that the game needed a higher resolution. And when the game was in a higher resolution, the sprites looked way too crunchy. And when the first demo came out, people were complaining that the palette was way too limiting and that it was really hard to pick enemies out against the background, which I agreed with. And so things just kind of slowly changed. The palette increased in colors, which meant that the models needed to be rendered again, or the sprites needed to be rendered again. And with more colors, the old models were starting to really show kind of how low quality they were. So I made new models, and then, you know, that kind of led to a complete art overhaul, and, you know, it just kind of kept going from there.
Now, on the subject of that first demo, I think I played the one back in, was it like Realms Deep 2021? That's like where it first showed up.
Yeah, this when I first heard of the game.
Yeah.
I remember the layout
that
of that very first mission being super different from when I played even just the demo, like pre-episode 1 release. Was that big sweeping change, was that in response to any feedback, or was it just sort of like a thing you did kind of your own preference?
So the biggest thing, when you work on a game as a hobbyist, I actually need to mute this video because it's really distracting. When you work as a hobbyist in game development, and oh my gosh, I got kicked into an ad now. Gosh dang it, YouTube. When you're working on game dev as a hobbyist, you know, you're only putting in, at least in my case, you know, maybe like a couple hours here and there during the week, because, you know, you've got a full-time job, and so the rate that you're learning stuff is just pretty slow. But once I started working on Cultic, not quite full-time at first, but, you know, putting in 4 hours a day and then some on the weekends after my full-time job, you start, you know, when you start to do level design every single day, when previously you'd only been doing it once a week, the like the quality of your work and the amount that you're learning increases exponentially. And so it didn't take it was probably like, by the time I was done with the shipyard map, the first map looked terrible in comparison. Like like the amount that I had learned in terms of level design flow and like how to make level geo look nice, and you know, all that stuff. Just, you went back and looked at level 1, and it was like a night and day difference. And just like the quality wasn't really up to where I wanted it to be. So I think around the time I was starting on the 4th map or so, I stopped and went back and completely redid the first map, because not only did it look bad, like just like physically the way the world was built was it was a little less than the quality I wanted, but also with all of the changes to the game's gameplay, where the player now moved faster and had sliding and kick boosting, and you had, you know, the mare's leg was now this really long range weapon, and the engagements needed to be longer because of it. That map it felt really constricted. You know, it was too constricted for you to really get the full range of utility out of your weapons, and it was too restricted for you to really utilize the full range of your movement. So it just really didn't feel like a good fit for the game anymore.
Yeah, because I remember getting really vertical, I think, in the redo, whereas my memory's failing me now on how it first went together, but I remember it being a lot less, like it didn't loop back on itself like it did when it got redone. That was kind of interesting. I also noticed you changed that first encounter with the chainsaw guy quite a bit.
Yeah, and even that in the V001 demo that I sent to 3D Realms, that encounter was even different there, where you were like kind of like following this like weird like black spectral ghost shadow thing through the mines. And then eventually it like paused and like hovered over a corpse, and if you got close enough to inspect it, then like the room got really dark and all these creepy sounds played, and then the chainsaw guy burst in. So it was originally a lot different, even from the original demo.
I don't know if it's particular to me and I'm just crap at playing it, but every time that chainsaw guy hits me, I can never escape it. It just, all my whole health just goes all. So all you have to do is stagger him. So like the shotgun and kicking is usually your best bet, because the kick only does like 1 damage, but it does like 20 force damage, and force damage is what basically determines what staggers an enemy. So just usually like kicking him in the head a couple times is usually enough to get him to let go. And the shotgun does a really good job too. Yeah, I love the lever action shot. I've heard it said that it's kind of so accurate that it almost puts the sniper rifle out of business, because it is literally, you can take someone's head off from 50 meters away with it. It's a really accurate weapon. But kind of on the subject, how did you come about choosing the roster of weapons?
I'm a bit of like I have like a bit of an unhealthy fetish for wooden furniture on guns, which generally means that I'm pretty biased towards like mid-century weaponry, like World War I, World War II firearms, before everything kind of became, just like black plastic, essentially. And so like the C96, your starting pistol, that's always been like my favorite firearm ever since. First, it was Han Solo's blaster in Star Wars, and then it showed up in Resident Evil 4 and was such a great gun in Resident Evil 4. So I've always had a big affinity for it. So that choice was easy. And then I just there's a lot of kind of unsung heroes of firearms that don't get that are really cool. I think that don't really see a lot of time in the limelight. So the Mare's Leg, I've always thought is a particularly fun little gun. I own one. It's just kind of like, it's really impractical, but it's just kind of got that trusty sidearm feel to it. I think it's just like a really cozy gun. And that's that kind of thought process kind of just drove the rest of the weapon choices too. It's like oh, I want to have an automatic weapon, but I don't want it to be like a Thompson, because like every game has a Thompson, and I don't want it to be but I don't want it to be a modern like an M16 or anything either. So you kind of look at what the options are, and I really like side mounted magazines. I think they have a really nice profile, and then you see that the Sten Mark V, which is a really uncommon variant of the Sten, had wooden furniture, and I was like, yeah, there you go, that's perfect.
Nice.
Yeah, man. It's nice that you essentially, because everyone always defaults to like the Doom school of thinking when it comes to weapons in there, and they kind of do variations on it. But there's always still some sort of shotgun. There's also sort of rocket launcher and that sort of thing. And the guns in Cultic always felt a little more antiquated. When you're playing it, that it's not kind of, there's clearly nothing here that you'll find in a kind of Call of Duty sort of game, unless the particular type of weapon, sniper rifle, etc. But 1 second, my hay fever is, I warned you beforehand, my hay fever is killing me today.
You did warn me.
Yeah, I can't get enough of that,
this is why
sniping action on that pistol, or the the ka-ching of the other ones. It's just like, whew.
Really metallic sound effects.
Yeah, that part of audio design is really important to me. Is like hearing, not just like the gunshot obviously is important, but there's so many other parts of the operation of these firearms that really lend to like the materials they're made out of, and the weight that the bolt has, and the age of the weapon, and it's so all of that, a lot of that, especially like the shotgun reload, a lot of that is recorded just off of my own guns. Some of it's Foley from just, I've got a bunch of like big sound packs of just like random weapon handling. But some of the really particular stuff, I just recorded myself in my closet with my field recorder and a bunch of clothes laid everywhere and up on the walls to try to dampen the audio.
Insulate the sound.
Yeah.
Yeah. Whenever I used to, I've told this story to Medium as well. Whenever I used to do voiceovers for our videos ages ago, before I hired a voiceover artist, I literally used to do it in the closet that's just opposite me right now, and I would have all of the clothes all over me in there, talking into this little mic. And like 30 seconds into it, I'd be sweating like a mofo, just dribbling all the way down me. And my missus, she'd be like, "What the hell have you been doing in there? You're sweating hard." I was like, "I swear, it's all above board." Yeah.
Yeah. I want to set up a proper recording space, but I only record anything. Like, gosh, it's very infrequent that I record. So if I have to go cram myself in the closet like once every couple months, that's not such a big deal.
Yeah. How'd you come up with the story for Cultic?
Gosh, so you just kind of like make it up as you go along. I'm not much of a writer, really. I mean, obviously, so the core concept of like, like being this like police officer / detective who comes back to life. That's one. I talk about the things that blood did influence on the game. That's a very clear blood influence. I really like that kind of like back from the dead for revenge kind of storyline.
I live again.
Yeah, and so it's kind of my own take on that. And then I don't really know that there's like a particular, like.
But do you break it down into chapters? And like each level, this is the storyline for that particular level, and it feeds into an overarching story. No?
No, I'm not nearly that good of a writer. It's I pretty much I really I just kind of build the maps as like what I feel is part of it's like I really want to have a map that has this in it. So how do I work that into the story? But some of it's just like logical progression. Like you think about like map 4 down in the mines. It's like, okay, you're underground right now. How am I going to get the player back to the surface? And it's like, well, they're going to have to take some kind of like elevator, and it's like, oh well, on the way back up maybe they could encounter something else. And then I was like, oh well, let's have that be like, let's do like a catacombs level. That would be fun. And then as you work on the levels, once I'm done actually building the map, I usually go back through and start placing all of the environmental storytelling stuff and like the notes. So I'm building the mines first, and then I'm gonna go try to tell the story of why the mines are there, and like why the cult is there. So it's usually like it's focused more on what kind of maps do I want to feature, and then trying to figure out how those maps are going to fit into the storyline. So it's but yeah, I'm not much of a writer, so I don't really go out and like storyboard or outline stuff. I'm just like my results the results won't be good enough to be worth all that effort.
Well, it's the reason why I ask it is because when you think of the kind of games that we usually tend to cover, they all kind of have this science fiction is a very kind of deep theme when it comes to these type of games, both the modern boomer shooters, and I don't know how you feel about the term boomer shooter, but the retro shooter wave that is come on now. There's a lot of science fiction in them, whereas Cultic very much feels like a almost film noir entry into that, where it kind of bucks the trend and doesn't really follow it. So it's with chapter, you can't really discuss chapter 2, can you? It's kind of I mean, we can always cut it out. We can always cut it out if you want to talk about it.
I can talk about some of it, but like, I mean, it's not done. So like, there's not really a lot of spoilers that exist yet.
Yeah, well, you said that you were kind of essentially making up the story as you went along. So I was thinking, what, I know that a lot of people were a little confused with kind of the release structure of it. Honestly, I thought that it was quite simple. This is a full game, and chapters 2 would be released as DLC. But everyone was like, oh, if it's being released in episodes, why is it not following the early access model? It's because it doesn't actually apply to the early access model. But in terms of the overarching storyline, is it already written out, or are you literally making it up as you go along?
So there's like general goals for the story, like I guess like bullet points, like for chapter 1, the idea of like, oh well, there's this cult, and they're really powerful, and they have their hands in a lot of pockets, and they're trying to, I won't spoil it for people, but they're clearly up to no good, and like the thing that they're trying to do was kind of decided on from the beginning, and so it's just like how do you tell that story? And chapter 2 is the same way, like what you're trying to do in chapter 2 is already planned, but like the details of it, those just kind of emerge along the way. You're kind of starting at like, I want the last map to be the player is here and they're doing this to stop the cult from doing that, and how do we get there? But I do want to comment on the early access thing too, because that was a really big struggle when the game launched, and it's like if you go and look at Steam's like early access program details, like it's pretty cut and dry that the program is mainly intended for games that are in beta. And that was the thing, is that chapter 1 of Cultic wasn't in beta. Like it was a finished product, playable from start to finish. All the weapons are there, all the enemies are there. It's a relatively, at least I think, a relatively polished product. Like this isn't like half of an experience. It's not like a buggy, pre-release version. It's a full game. And I gotta wonder if the people who are really mad about the release structure like just weren't around for like the 2010s when episodic gaming was like pretty popular. You had games like Resident Evil Revelations and Walking Dead, and like all these games that tackled episodic structure. But I can't really blame them, because like like Steam isn't really set up for episodic games. It doesn't really have a good way to handle it. And so the best way to do it is, just have a base game and then have the extra chapters as DLC. But there is some, there's some overlap between Cultic and early access. But I think the idea that like if a game doesn't release with all of its content right away, then it should be in early access is kind of crazy because by that logic, Elden Ring should have been an early access game. Which of course is crazy. So
I haven't played a single from Software game. Everyone raves about them, and they just don't appeal to me in the slightest bit, because I don't like games that it takes you 20 attempts just to get past a particular part of it, and everyone's like, "Oh, but that's the fun of it. It's so hard." I'm one of those people that find it frustrating. If I could play a game over one sitting or two or three, 3 nights or something like that, I'd be a very happy bunny. I don't like games that I've constantly got to replay the same thing 100 times just to get past that particular part. All it does is lead to frustration on my part.
I definitely wasn't. I wasn't trying to take a shot at Elden Ring because I actually like Elden Ring. I was just meaning more so like Elden Ring. I think people can pretty universally say was like a completed product, so to say that it should have been early access because they had DLC on the way is crazy, and that's basically what. How Cultic's structure is. But the other thing is that if I was going to wait until all of Cultic's content was done before I ever released it, I would have run out of money, and then I wouldn't have had electricity to continue making the game, which would have been a problem. So for smaller teams, the episodic structure makes a lot more sense, especially from the point of like you get to release something and give your community, something to play. And then you get to kind of take the feedback and, of course, the revenue from that and pour that into continuing the product. And I think the early access decision is much more important for like what your release timeline is. Like Gloomwood did early access as well. But Gloomwood's release structure, they've been introducing kind of like piecemeal areas to the game, at least has been my understanding. And that makes a lot of sense because then you can kind of present your players with a roadmap for how we're going to handle this early access. But I'm not doing that with Cultic because it's like I don't have a roadmap for you. I'm going to work on chapter 2 and it'll be done whenever it's done. And I think that would be a really crappy thing to tell early access players.
But I think there was criticism recently in regards to Sulaco's release philosophy as well, and that it's gone to early access, but it's still basically a complete game. And it's obviously public knowledge that it ends on a hangover. Hangover, is that the word? Cliffhanger.
Cliffhanger.
Hangover.
It could also end on a hangover.
Yeah, it got very drunk. And the following episodes will come after that. But I think kind of we as PC gamers are so used to early access being kind of episode 1 is released and then, months later episode 2 is released, etc. So to release a full game and then episodes afterwards as DLC, as like Doom Eternal, for example, the full game is released and the Ancient Gods came as 2 separate ones afterwards. It's as long as people understand that that's the business model going forward, there really isn't anything that they should be complaining about. But
it's kind of like I think it's kind of just like a Venn diagram, and there's overlap between like an episodic model and early access, because early access. Like if you go and look at the documentation on the Steamworks site for it, like it is part of the to qualify for early access is you're supposed to be able to provide a roadmap of content and like regular updates for the community. And so like I said, I think for like Gloomwood, for example, like even though I think the game was probably stable enough when it released, that I haven't played it myself, so I'm just speculating. But based on its reviews, I'm guessing it was good enough at release that it wasn't, it didn't feel like you were playing a beta of a game. Versus like 7 Days to Die should have definitely been an early access game, like it was, because it was a very rough early product, and they were planning to deliver regular updates and kind of keep building on it. And Sulaco's kind of a mix between the two, where it's also a stable product with a ton of gameplay, but if they intend to release smaller piecemeal updates, then they do kind of fit the criteria for early access in that they have a roadmap. So I don't know, I think part of it's just that so many people have taken advantage of early access in good and bad ways that I don't think anybody's really clear on what early access means anymore. Because early access can mean everything from a game like Sulaco that is quality and has a lot of content to something that's an absolute unplayable dumpster fire and then they're like, oh well, it's going to get better. There's a very wide swath of content there.
So you've played Sulaco?
I haven't. No, not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
My backlog is terrifyingly large.
I've been trying to do that myself. I've made a habit of only installing the games that I'm actively in the middle of playing, and so like, if a game has several sequels or something, I'll just install the first one, and I'll be like, I'll play that one, then I'll finish it, and then I'll move on to the next. And then I immediately broke that by jumping straight to Fear 2, even though I've only played like 2 hours of the first Fear game. Just because I watched the G-Man Lives video on Fear 2, and I was like, oh, I'm in the mood now, man.
Fear 2 is very fun. I don't blame you.
Harsh.
I don't understand like why everyone glows in it when they're shot and stuff like that. But you mentioned when we first started it today that the person that's playing the game in here is really kind of whizzing their way through the game. How do you decide the difficulty? So like you break down difficulties. What are the criteria that you put in place to buff things up all up to the top tier of it, while still maintaining, of course, a balance of challenge and fun?
Oh, I mean, a lot of it honestly is just trial and error. When you have people who playtest the game that aren't you'll get people that'll be like, this map is ridiculously hard, and you're like, oh, okay. So you just kind of start to learn what kinds of things really screw players over. Because since I made the maps, I know where all the enemies are, and so nothing really takes me by surprise. But if I have a pistol cultist that's placed in a real naughty place where he's just like, the player doesn't obviously see them when they walk into a room, and he like frequently gets cheap shots off. That's not necessarily something that I will notice playing it myself, because I know he's there, so I'm just going to shoot him when I come around the corner. But for players who had never played it before, they're going to walk around the corner and he's going to dump 5 bullets into their sinuses before they even realize he's there. And that's where you kind of learn, okay, well, stuff like that's not fair to most players. But for players who kind of enjoy that kind of grueling difficulty, enemies can have optional placements where they don't spawn on certain difficulties, and so maybe that pistol cultist who's in a really nasty spot, or that Sten cultist who is kind of in a suppressing fire location, they just don't spawn unless you're playing on very hard or extreme. And so that's a big part of it. Is just like how mean do I want to be to the player in this room? And for the most part, I don't want to be mean to the player. Pretty much like all of Cultic's design is in the player's favor. Like a lot of stuff is kind of stilted towards the player. Like an example is like damage numbers are an integer, which means that if enemies deal out decimal point damage, it has to be rounded. And so damage that you deal out to enemies is rounded up, but damage they deal to you is rounded down. Enemy bullets have travel time, but yours don't. The player's bullets are hit scan. So you get that advantage over them. Players like the shotgun, when you fire it, like the accuracy of the pellets starts at pretty much like laser accurate, and then as each pellet is spawned, it gets worse and worse. So when you fire the shotgun, like the first 2 pellets are roughly pistol accurate. So it's like as long as you're pointing the shotgun at an enemy, you'll always at least do some damage to them. So the shotgun doesn't ever feel like you're wasting shells. There's just lots of little things like that are supposed to be in the player's favor. So then if you want to be mean to the player for like extreme difficulty, it's going to be stuff just like overwhelming punishment for, and enemies telegraph their shots, and their shots have travel time. So, if an enemy telegraphs their shot and you don't get out of the way and you don't do anything to avoid their bullet, then I don't feel too bad about dishing out triple damage on extreme, because these are all I feel like I've given the player everything they need to avoid that attack. And so you can kind of you can be mean in your punishments to the player, as opposed to just doing things that are going to feel like cheating to them. An example would be like like the Cultists in Blood, where pretty much every hit feels kind of unfair because it's the reaction time and the accuracy and the hit scan is so crazy. And some people love that, but that's that's a big design difference. Is I don't want the game to feel unfair like that. So I don't want difficulty to come from beginners traps and enemies being like super duper cheap and lasering the player. I want it to come from other places, like mistakes being very costly, or ammo being precious, and you have to be a little more careful about your shot placement and stuff like that.
Yeah, it always bothers me when... No, carry on, mate.
Oh yeah, I actually had a question about this because I was dealing with the difficulties yesterday and noticing what would you say would be kind of the I guess the comparison between the integers or the adjacent design choices between, like, say, standard and hard? Because I noticed hard really got me to the point where I was basically just hatcheting people about 30 minutes in because everything else had been depleted. And I was like, man,
so
this is kind of like a puzzle game now.
Damage-wise, it actually isn't that much different. That's one of the things I really wanted to avoid with my higher difficulties was not turning enemies into damage sponges. So like with I think on extreme, enemies on average have 25% more health than normal, but like an axe cultist or a pistol cultist on standard, I think has 20 or 25 hit points, and the pistol does 5 damage, and it's doubled if you get a headshot. So normally it must be 25 because it takes 3 pistol headshots to kill pistol cultist, I think, on standard or hard. I usually play on hard, so that might be what I'm thinking of. And then on
I thought
extreme,
that was just me.
And then on extreme, they have 40 health, so it takes 4 headshots instead of 3 to kill them. So it's like it's just enough to throw off your rhythm, but not enough where it feels like you're dumping ammo into enemies. But their drop rates get a little bit lower, so you're getting a little bit less ammo from enemies. But otherwise, honestly, I think a lot of it is just like mind games that the players, like they're maybe getting a little more frantic in combat because the damage is so much higher, and so they're wasting more ammo. But like the overall like damage you need to kill enemies doesn't increase very much. The damage that you're receiving goes up a lot. I think it's like tripled on extreme.
Difference.
It's pretty high.
That in combination
enemy,
with much fewer ammo drops, I was like, uh-oh.
Yeah, well, enemy behaviors also change starting on hard, where like the amount of time they wait between telegraphing their attack and actually attacking gets lower. Like most enemies will wait, I think on casual, an enemy will wait like 3/4 of a second before they fire, which is a pretty significant pause. And then on extreme, it's like 0.2 of a second. It's like nothing. The amount of shots that they fire, like a pistol cultist fires 3 shots on hard and lower, and then on very hard it's 4, and on extreme it's 5, and they fire faster and they're more accurate. The accuracy of enemy projectile prediction gets higher, which is actually kind of funny. So basically, like when an enemy who's throwing a projectile, like an axe or throwing dynamite, when they calculate that trajectory, they calculate basically a value of throwing it right at your feet, and then a value of throwing it considering your own velocity, and then depending on the difficulty, it basically randomizes the result somewhere between those 2 values. So on casual and normal, an enemy can throw something anywhere from where you're standing to where you're running to, but it's always random. So they seem pretty inaccurate. But on extreme, they almost always predict your movement, which if you are like pretty proficient with the game, it actually makes it easier to avoid their attacks because that they're always going to predict your movement. So as soon as they throw the thing, you just change directions and they'll miss every single time. And that's kind of like one of those Resident Evil 4 design influences, because Resident Evil 4 has that adaptive difficulty where if you're playing the game at a high level, the combat gets easier the harder the game tries to make it, because when the adaptive difficulty is high, enemies will always try to predict your movements, and so you can just run at them. You can just like very briefly run towards an enemy and they'll wildly overestimate their attack. And so it's really easy to juke enemies into attacking early. But if your adaptive difficulty is low because you keep dying or you keep missing shots or you keep taking damage, then enemies, they won't attack until you get much closer. So it gets a lot harder to trick them into attacking and have them miss. And so it's kind of one of those things that's like, it seems harder until you learn how to game the system. So that's just one of those fun little things.
Nice. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
In terms of you adjusting the difficulty levels, is this from feedback from playtests or from the demo, or do you kind of source it from everywhere really, or do you just decide up front this is how I'm going to? Because a lot of devs, a lot of games, their idea of increasing difficulty is just making the enemies bullet sponges or throwing 3 times the enemies on the screen. What you've explained then is a very kind of analytical way of how things kind of change. Where did you source that feedback from?
I mean, you have to pick a starting point for your difficulties. So a lot of the stuff like the enemy behavior changes as difficulties get higher, and the damage differences. That all was decided from the beginning, and then you can kind of do some of that tweaking your own as the developer. Obviously, like if there's one enemy that just keeps demolishing you, then clearly they might be a little overtuned. But then once you get the demo out is when you really start to get more valuable feedback on the specifics of like what things you weren't really able to consider as a developer. I'm trying to think of like a good example of something that got that maybe got like majorly nerfed as a result of player feedback. The range on the shotgunner was a big one, and that was actually more of a bug than anything else. Most enemies, so the enemy shotgunners, their spread is a lot tighter than your shotgun is, and that's by design, because it's easy to dodge a tight spread, but it's hard to dodge a spread that's all over the place. So like, if a shotgunner is at a medium range from you and they fire, all you have to really do is dash to the side, and most of their pellets will miss. But if they have the same spread as you, I found that it was really hard to reliably dodge their entire attack, because one of those pellets would always go wide and would always hit you. But enemy shotgunners had a bug in their code where they did not have a maximum engagement distance from the player. So they would just shoot at you from, if they could see you, they would fire at you, which meant that they could be like 200 meters away and they would just be like lasering you with their shotgun.
They're very accurate.
Yeah, and that's not a problem I ever really had as the developer, because I know where the shotgunners are, so I'm just prioritizing them. As soon as I get near them, I'm just shooting them with the mare's leg. But for players who, they don't know where all the spawns are, it's much easier for a shotgunner to, feed them a spoonful of lead from across the map. And people kept complaining about the shotgunners like being way overpowered, and I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Like they don't do that much damage. And then I start to watch people streaming the game, and they're like, well, this guy just shot me from across the map. I'm like, well, he shouldn't be able to do that. So then you go and you look at the code and you're like, no, I screwed this up. And I think that might even still be a bug right now. I don't know if I've actually fixed that yet or not, since I haven't pushed a patch in a long time. But stuff like that,
I haven't noticed it.
But I can't think of any other, like, I'm sure there are. I can't think of any other like gigantic difficulty tweaks. I guess the first boss of the game getting a checkpoint in the middle of the fight was a player feedback thing. In my mind, it was kind of like, that boss fight has 2 parts to it, and players were getting past the first part no problem, but then they were dying in the second part, because the second part kind of mixes up the fight a little bit and gives you something you're not used to. And in my mind, beating the entire boss fight is the challenge. But a good point that people made is that players are getting through the first part of this fight, so clearly they've mastered that part of the gameplay, and so this this kind of skill check isn't really valuable anymore. And so the second part, they're basically just slogging their way through the first half of the fight just to have a chance at the second half. And then I remembered, my own problem with games like, Dark Souls is a good example, where it's like, I'm pretty good at fighting regular enemies, but it's the bosses that keep killing me. And then I have a 20-minute walk to get back to the boss just to try it again. And that's where I get frustrated with the game, which is why Elden Ring is the first one that I actually beat, because the checkpoints, the sites of grace are far more forgiving.
Yeah, I was just about to bring it up. I was like, that's the one thing I like about Elden Ring. If I had to say one thing, is that you don't have to do those garbage runs to get there, and then you end up getting so distracted and frustrated by just things you don't need to worry about anymore that you have to get back to the boss.
Is Bloodborne? Bloodborne is a From Software game, right? I hear about that literally every few weeks, about people being like, why isn't it coming to PC and that sort of stuff? Where's my 30 FPS mode, my 60 FPS mode or something? And what I love about the From Software games is not necessarily the games, because of how I've said before. It's just that I think that as a visual medium, their iconography that they create, their artwork is just an absolute tour de force of design. It's literally, when you look at it, it's a genuine argument that games are art, rather than just running and shooting and hacking people. But so you're telling me that Elden Ring is something I should play? Is that what you say?
It is more noob friendly than most of them. Yes.
I probably wouldn't play it again today, because I beat it and I loved it. Like, I played it all the way through, like, pretty much nonstop over the course of a couple weeks. But I played it when it was first out, so there were a lot of other people playing it, so community engagement was high. So there were tons of summons to help you with fights. There were tons of signs laying everywhere. Like, it was a fun time to be part of the community. And there were
Let Me Solo thing was.
Yeah. And also, like, the overpowered stuff was still in the game. So when I'm, like, really struggling with a boss, I can just get out, the Erd Tree Great Shield and just, exploit a boss to death with it. And most of that stuff is gone now, which I'm sure is great for people who want the game to be, like, this perfectly balanced thing that punishes everybody. But for me, that's like, well, I don't know if I want to play it now. Yeah. Because my philosophy with boss fights is that, like, they're only ever cool once. And then after that, they're just a pacing killer. And I know there's probably loads of people that would disagree with me on that, and that's fine. But, like, that's one of my favorite things about Resident Evil 4 is that, like, I think pretty much every single boss has some kind of exploit that trivializes the fight. And I think that's fine, because you won't know that the first time you play the game. So, like, the first time you fight that boss, it's always going to be like, holy crap, what is this thing? Oh my god, it's killing me. How do I kill it? You always get that first moment of, like, oh geez, like, what is this thing? But then, like, I don't know, on subsequent playthroughs, I always feel like they're just, like, time wasters. And I would much rather just get through it and get to the next part of the game. So that kind of thing doesn't really bother me.
Bosses do tend to stop the storytelling dead in the tracks. And it's like a commercial break in a movie. It's like the storyline stops and you have to address that particular objective unto itself before you can continue the storyline afterwards. And if a boss fight is too hard, it can feel like it's almost a passion killer. Like you're frustrated and you can't get past it and you just want to continue. And that's why I do tend to prefer shorter games, because I like to experience, like, a great novel, the beginning, the middle, and the end. It's like watching a movie. So I'm more predisposed to enjoying games that are kind of maximum 6 hour length. The idea of, like, putting 200 hours into a Final Fantasy game, it just makes my face melt and be like, no, it's not happening.
Elden Ring's
I
a
can't
long
do it.
one. Elden Ring is long, so that will not be a 6 hour playthrough.
Well, I'd imagine for the budget that they had, can you imagine the sort of feedback they get if they put out a 6 hour game or something like that? That's.
I think my first run was, like, almost 90 hours, and that didn't even include. I didn't even do Consecrated Snowfield or Millennia or anything. I didn't do a lot of the side stuff, but. Granted, a lot of that was, like, I would beat a boss and then I would hang out in the spawn pool for, like, 4 hours and just help other people beat it, which was really fun. But I don't know, like, I'm kind of the same way. Like you were saying, when I play a game, it's because I'm like, I want to experience the whole game and I want to finish it. And I just don't have a lot of time to play single player games anymore. If I'm having to spend 4 hours bashing my head into a wall against, like, a single boss, it's going to be frustrating. And people talk about, like, well, it's like when you finally beat it though. And I get that, like, that's 100% valid, but it's like the reason why I really like Doom 2016 and I didn't enjoy Doom Eternal, is people talk about, like, oh, by the time I was done with this fight, like, I was sweating and shaking. I'm like, that doesn't sound like fun to me. I don't want to sweat and shake when I play video games. But that's just me. That's okay.
Medium hasn't played the Ancient Gods, and the Ancient Gods is one of the toughest things I have ever experienced in my life. I was literally sweating after, just like, it makes that 3 hour campaign feel like you've been playing it for 6 hours. And I say to him, that you need to play it because it's so great, because this feeling of accomplishment. But Doom is an exception, I think, within our genre, and that it doesn't matter how long it is or whatnot. It's ingrained within our upbringing, that this is the game franchise that we love, whether it's tough or not. I understand where you're coming from in regards to Doom Eternal. Every fight is a chess match, and you're constantly running around for resource, and it becomes like I just want to enjoy the fight and not try to, I don't want it to be too difficult or something like that. What are your thoughts on the upcoming Doom game, the Dark Ages?
Oh, probably I'm not really gonna probably look into it too much until there's actual gameplay. From what they showed off in that first trailer, it certainly looks like it's gonna be a little more slower, a little more slow paced, which will be nice. And that looks like there's an actual focus on melee, which will be cool. I was really frustrated that across 2016 and Eternal, we've had 2 games where they've teased me with the Crucible, and in neither game have I been able to just swing it around. It's like, it didn't exist outside of a key item in the first game, and it was just like a gimmicky BFG 2.0 in the second game. And that was frustrating. I just want to starting up Doom Eternal was I was really, really hyped for it. The trailers. I loved Doom 2016. I was so excited for Eternal. And then I remember like this roller coaster like plunge of hype when I booted it up on launch day, and like the first thing, like you get spawned into this room with these like crusty little shambling zombies, and you can't melee them to death. And I was like, oh dear, I'm not gonna like this game.
He's got some weak ass punch in it. It's like when he punches them, it's almost like the sound is a slap more than a punch. It's so squishy.
Yeah, it's
this
like
weak ass Doomslayer punch. It is, yeah, and it's clearly done on purpose, so you don't go around punching everyone all the time. But
I really wanted in my mind, and I don't want this to become a Doom Eternal podcast, but I think you should have still been able to punch. You should have still been able to punch trash to death, and the blood punch should have been the Crucible. Like the Crucible should have been your thing that charges up with kills. Like that makes sense. It's like a hell energy thing. Like why wouldn't it recharge when you kill like hell beings? I don't know, but so like the general thing for me is like I consider like gameplay to be on a spectrum between, on one end of the spectrum you have getting to play a game, and then on the other end of the spectrum you have the game expecting you to perform. And so it's like playing versus performing. And I feel like Doom Eternal and Dark Souls for that matter is too far on the perform side of it. Like you have to be playing the game to like a certain measure of excellence to be able to get anywhere in it. And at least in Doom Eternal you can turn the difficulty down, which is what I did, and I finally got to play it all the way through. But I don't know. Just like there's a certain point where I'm not playing a game to like me personally. This is a very me thing. I'm not playing games to try to be like the best and to get the highest score and to have my skills tested. I just want to have fun. And so and so I just want to have fun and relax. And as soon as I can't do that anymore, I'm not really interested in the game.
Yeah.
But that's me. I'm old. Like that's an old guy thing. I'm okay with that.
What? I know, I agree with you. I'm in my mid-40s and I feel the exact same way. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that as you get older, you do get less time to yourself. And so the sessions that you have with games are, you want them to be enjoyable, not to be frustrating, because you don't get to do it as much as you did when you were a teenager. Yeah, my days of playing Metal Gear on Extreme just for the heck of it, they are over. I'm not that guy anymore.
Yeah, I always found it really weird that as much of I am exactly like y'all, and that when I play, I want to be entertained. I don't want to be asked to put on a show for the developers. Yeah. Kind of they've set up the program in motion, let it go. That I liked Eternal more than 2016. Even though I was terrible at it, which is really weird. It's not like I was good at it. I was lording over my I got this figured out, guys. You guys just need to catch up. I was ass. I was so bad. They offered me the power armor or whatever it's called on the Unmaker fight at the end. It's the Unmaker, the angel.
I got offered that. So the Khan Maker.
Thing. They were just like, do you want this? I think you're gonna need it. And I'm like, yeah. Hand it over.
There's no shame in playing that, though. If that's how you play a game, to enjoy it.
It's frustrating because I love pretty much everything about Doom Eternal except for the gameplay, which is sad because it's like I love the presentation, I love the set pieces, I love the design of the weapons, I love the audio design, I love the enemy designs, but then just like the gameplay, I just hit a brick wall with it where just like Cultic's a really good example of how much I value player freedom in games, like the freedom to just do what you want and play the game how you want. And Doom 2016 had that. You know, it was like, if you want to run around with the shotgun and shotgun everything, have fun. It's Doom. You should be able to do that. And then Doom Eternal was like, here's your shotgun, here's your 4 shells. And it's like, what do you mean my 4 shells? Like, what? I need more than that.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I was just like, oh man, and of course the very first time I played Doom Eternal, I missed the memo that your last pip of chainsaw fuel regenerates. I completely missed that. So that I was like, this game's dumb. Like, this is stupid. There's no ammo. And then when I decided to give it another try, I caught that note and I was like, oh, okay, this makes a lot more sense now.
What's I mentioned at the beginning that Cultic is kind of seen as being one of the top tier of the new generation of boomer shooters, along with Turbo Overkill and Sulaco, for example. But in your opinion, as both a player and as a developer, what recent games of within the genre have really been standing out to you as being great examples of it?
I don't really know that I can answer that, because out of the genre, I think Incision is the only one I've played. Like the entire time I was working on Cultic, I did not touch any of the other boomer shooters that were in development or releasing, because it was like a twofold thing of I don't like, I was like way too intimidated by them. I was like, if I play this, I'm gonna think my own game sucks, and then it's gonna kill my motivation. Another one of not wanting to be influenced by them. And just like playing Incision almost did that. Like I remember booting up Incision, and the first time it shows you had to do like the revolver trick shot, I was like, oh crap.
Yeah.
I was like, this is way cooler than anything in Cultic.
We've had the Incision dev on a previous episode. He's actually a good friend, I think, of mine at this point, I would say. So you should check out that episode. It's very informative. Incision, I think, if you are going to play a game, perhaps Incision it's so distinctive, I think, amongst the genre, that maybe, you play something a little more generic, you wouldn't have been so intimidated. But Incision kind of I would put as being up there with the top tiers, and I said that to the dev as well, because it's so distinctive and it stands out so much. And I know what he's got planned for the next stages.
But yeah,
it is difficult. It is.
I've played Incision, and I've played, of course, the 3D Realms releases, Graven and Phantom Fury. But a lot of the other ones on the market, are just like sitting in my backlog, because I like staunchly refused to touch them while Cultic was in development, because I was like, it's going to be way healthier to just wait. And then since then, I just like, my single player time has just been so limited. I feel like anytime I have time to sit down and play a game, I'm like far more likely to play something multiplayer, so I can catch up with my friends too. And then it's just like, and then as soon as I do find time to sit down with a single player game, I get like 20 minutes into it, and then my brain is like, you could be working right now, and I'm like, yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I agree, and I know the feeling. My office is, I work from home, and every single moment that I have that's free, it's almost like you feel guilty that you're enjoying free time when you should be working and something like that, and you have to kind of pull yourself away. For me, it's I purposefully go out of the house. I'll go to a country park or a garden center or something like that, where my mind is not surrounded by technology. But I haven't played Phantom Fury. What was the other one you mentioned? The other 3D Realms? Graven
was the other one.
Yeah,
I
haven't played Graven.
I don't know if I wrote. It's not exactly a boomer shooter in the same vein as most of the other ones. But...
Yeah, it's more of a fantasy sort of heretic. I would imagine is probably something a little closer in terms of its design.
Yeah,
it's a
little more focused on. Wrath is one I haven't played yet. Actually, I haven't.
Oh, it's brilliant.
I've not played it. It looks really good.
One of our early episodes we played Wrath, and it's another visual tour de force. Wrath was a great one that I played. I haven't played Iron Fury yet because I haven't played I haven't played Phantom Fury yet because I haven't played Aftershock. So I need to
Gotcha.
play Aftershock. I have to play Aftershock first so that I can play, because it seems odd going from Iron Fury to Phantom Fury when there's one in the middle that you haven't played yet. So I'm going to get round to that because I absolutely love them. I'm a big build engine nut rider. I absolutely love those games.
Yeah, Ion Fury
So
is really
it's
good.
yeah, it is. It's a fantastic soundtrack as well. It is really really cool. But
It was definitely
when
it was definitely really hard to be working on Cultic as like a solo developer who is kind of just like at like artwork, and then within the same pool you've got like all the artists that are working on Graven and Phantom, and then like you see the screenshots from the team out of Aftershock, and I'm like, oh my god, no one's gonna buy Cultic. It's just like, oh man, is this what having an
You
art
seem-
team looks like? That's crazy.
yeah, you seem genuinely surprised that Cultic was actually as well received as it was, because
Oh
it's,
yeah. Oh, yeah.
But I mean, it seems obvious when you play. I played the demo, and obviously the demo is very different to what was released. The thing that hooked me onto it was actually the music. And I just kind of stood in the yard for a bit listening to the music. I'm like, this is a banging soundtrack right now. And that's what got me into wanting to play actually the game. And it turns out the game was fucking awesome. That's honestly how I felt about it. So to me, it's not surprising that the game was performed so well. But I think
I was honestly just like I was like hoping and praying for very positive. I was like, if I can just get to very positive, because I feel like very positive is like that benchmark where people will just like buy your game. Like they're not going to be like But I feel like once you hit mostly positive, it's like, at least me personally as a gamer, when I see mostly positive is when you start to be like, oh, I don't know.
It's a bit mixed when we see it. Yeah.
And so I was like, if I can just hit very positive, like that's all I care about. And so then like, a month after release or however long it took to hit 500 reviews, and it was overwhelmingly positive at like 99%, I was like, oh, uh-oh. I don't know what to do with this.
Yeah. Well, just work on chapter 2 with the full confidence that people are going to actually buy it because they're anticipating it. But
I think it's interesting to hear you say that the music of the game is what drew you in, because it's always interesting seeing how kind of hearing from people what draws them into the game, because it's so there's so, because you've got people who just see the art style and they're like, oh, that looks crunchy, I want to play that. And then you have people who are big fans of Blood or Duke 3D, and they're like, oh, it looks like a build engine game. And then you've got people who are horror fans and they're like, oh, it's a horror game. And then you got like the Resident Evil 4 fans that hear that it's kind of like Resident Evil 4, and they're like, oh, I'm going to check that out. And then it's just like you get all the, and because the game, the difficulty modes scale way down to casual, and the game is in my opinion very accessible. You get like it's not just the shooter community that is playing the game, which is why I think even today, like the game, like Cultic still gets pretty decent organic exposure and discovery. You constantly are getting new people who are like, how have I never heard of this game before? And I'm like, I don't know, man. That's a good question. But it's just like even at Gamescom, when I took the demo there in 2022, I had people stopping. Like, probably the thing I heard the most at the Gamescom booth was like, I don't normally enjoy this kind of game, but and like, but it's I'm really having fun with this, because it's like I'm not good at video games, so I'm not going to make a shooter that requires like Doom Eternal levels of excellence in the gameplay. And so you've got people who are good at video games and are good at shooters, and they crank the difficulty up to extreme and they have a good time. And then you have people who just put it on casual and blow cultists up and they have a good time, and like those are both completely valid ways to play the game. Those are very valid. That's also the YouTube video that we're watching is the same thing.
I've never been.
Part of it's pretty important for that too. Like the ability to have something other than just hold the trigger type gameplay that really gives you like something to aspire to, even if you're not necessarily outsmarting the AI or anything, or you can take so many shots it's ridiculous. It always gives you like some like little skill, like, oh, I did that,
Do you watch the YouTubers' videos on it? Do you read the reviews and that sort of thing, or is it something that you would prefer to be a little more insular and not be exposed to it, unless that is feedback in regards to its development?
Well, when the game came out, I was really obsessive about reading reviews, just because it was like I need to know what people are saying about the game, and part of it is feedback-wise. Part of it was frantically F5ing the Steam discussion boards looking for bugs so I could fix them as fast as possible. But then it's like, when an account like Civi releases a video on your game and he has such a strong voice or rather an influential voice in the community, it's like I need to know, like, agree or not, whether I agree or not with what this reviewer is saying, I need to know what they have said so that I know what I'm up against now, because if you get, without naming names, if you get a reviewer who just like slams the game because it's not enough like blood, it's like, okay, well now I know, like, I'm going to get some complaints about this. I'm going to get some people negatively reviewing the game because, this person whose content they enjoy told them to go in expecting blood, and then that's not what they get. And, so it's just you're just keeping your finger on the pulse of the community a little bit. But nowadays if somebody with a decent following releases a review, I'll usually watch it just to kind of know what to expect. But I don't really read reviews anymore, because I'm definitely one of those people who I could read 100 positive reviews, and as soon as I read one negative one, it like ruins my day, and I just like obsess over it. So I'm just not going to subject myself to that anymore. Because I think the game is at a point where, as long as I don't really betray my audience, I think it's probably gonna stay fairly positive. So at least until Chapter 2 comes out, I don't think I really need to worry much about the public perception changing. I was really worried about like when Cultic was on GDQ, and it had like 65,000 people watching, and a very small chunk of those people are probably retro shooter fans. You get that big exposure to a new crowd suddenly, and you wonder if that's going to negatively impact your scores, because suddenly you're completely out of your familiar community, or you're away from people who appreciate games like this kind of in some ways, regardless of their quality, as long as they are as long as they're fun. It's like I love retro shooters, but now you've got people who aren't even familiar with retro shooters, who are coming in, and they are basically they've probably never played Blood, they've never played, maybe haven't even played Resident Evil 4, so they don't play or enjoy the games that this game draws inspiration from, and so it's kind of, you kind of wonder what's going to happen then. Like, are these people all going to be like, because they can't appreciate the nuances, they're going to be like, this color palette sucks, and that's going to be their entire review? And that didn't happen, and that was really surprising, honestly. And I think some of that's probably due to the fact that the game is $10. Like, I don't think you can really get too angry at it, and I'm really curious to see if that'll change when Chapter 2 comes out, since the plan is probably to increase the price when you have Chapter 2 included.
Because there's more game there, isn't there? So you would charge more. Yeah.
So, but I'm wondering, if I try, which no decisions have been made on that, nor have I really started thinking about it. But if the game increases to like, 15 or 17 or whatever dollars, then is that going to suddenly change people's perception? Because I think that like $9.99 is kind of like that's like the F it price. You're like, I'll try this, like whatever. That's, it's like when a game like Lethal Company comes out, and you're like, people say this is fun and it's only $10, like whatever, I'll give it a try. But when your game is closer, but when it's closer to like 20 or 25, that you're like, I don't know. Like either I'm really into this, or I'm gonna wait, maybe wait for it to go on sale, because my backlog's already huge and got plenty of other stuff to spend money on. Lord knows. I
think we're lucky. I mean, it's in that the prices of the games that developers like yourself put out. You've got people in the AAA space right now that are paying $60, $70 for a game, and it's only getting more expensive. And even those games are monetized to shit, even throughout the whole of their campaigns. So I think we are very blessed in that our particular sphere of the gaming industry, a lot of the titles are genuinely better than a lot of AAA, games that are out there in terms of ingenuity. B, have a far closer, tight-knit community for us to be able to talk with. I'm talking with you right now about your game here. It's not like I can just call up, freaking Xbox or something and invite them on there. There's a community around what we do. And the third one is that the prices are so low that you really can just one day just buy 4 or 5 of them, offhand. So it's But just kind of leading on to kind of, I know the time is getting up there. Kind of one final thing from my side. Once Cultic is kind of done with, do you have plans beyond that, or are you not even close to thinking about that?
Yeah,
A
I've got
follow-up game.
yeah, well, probably not a follow-up to Cultic. I think unless Chapter 2 suddenly generates some like gigantic life-changing demand for the game, I don't have any plans past Chapter 2. You know, I'm to be totally honest, I'm like really not necessarily tired of working on it, but like my hype for it has really died because there's so many other projects I want to work on. And I kind of feel stuck. I will say that bringing Nick on has really changed Chapter Two's development in such a great way because he's like getting to work with somebody else and bounce ideas around and just somebody who's as creative and insightful as Nick is. It's been a really big fresh like breath of fresh air kind of injected into working on the game, and that has helped a lot. But yeah, I've got games I want to work on next. I've got just like a big pile of Google Drive design documents for games that I'd like to start on. I'm not sure exactly which one, but I would say that there's a pretty good bet after Chapter 2 is out, I'm probably not going to work on any more games that take more than like a year to finish because this has been a very long road.
All right, so you're gonna go kind of like how David Szymanski and Merlino Games kind of releases a small hour-long game every 6 months or something like that, rather than a big-ass long game that takes you, 2 years to make.
I don't know if it'll necessarily be about like the length, but more so focusing on games that don't require so much effort to create content. Like the problem with Cultic is that it's since it's just a linear map-based campaign game, the only way to make more like meaningful revenue generating content for the game is to make more maps, and the maps are extremely like resource intensive. All the new art assets and just like all of the map design and all the testing and all of the setting up all of the like interactions and the set pieces, like it's so much work. I think on average when I was working on Chapter 1, and of course Chapter 1 I was working some pretty unhealthy hours, but it would take me like 2 months to make a map, and then players beat it in like 10 minutes, and so it's a really unsatisfying balance of like effort versus what you produce. Whereas if I were making like for example, like a roguelike, something with a little bit of procedural content, you can add one new enemy, and that completely changes the way the game is played. And so there's potential for games that they don't require so much effort and so much labor just to produce 10 minutes of content. So like I don't know what game I'm going to make next, but it's definitely not going to be like a story mode linear game like this. I don't think it's so much work.
Yeah. Well, whatever it is, I'm sure we'll be looking forward to it as much as we're looking forward to Cultic Chapter 2. Is there anything else that you want to, do you want to touch on, before we wrap up? Leave the floor open to yourself.
Oh man, I don't think so.
Okay.
Always happy to be here and always happy to talk about Cultic and game development stuff. So I appreciate you guys having me on.
Well, when Chapter 2 comes out, it would be nice to have you back on and just kind of be part of your publicity bandwagon in terms of getting the word out there for it and stuff. Play our little part to help you out. So that would be cool. Yeah.
Sorry guys, after Chapter 2 comes out, I'm moving to the moon, so I will be.
What? Cool. Medium, would you like to? Yeah, Medium, you got anything you want to say, mate?
I had one small question, just because I noticed everybody mentions Resident Evil 4 a lot, and it wasn't until G-Man brought that up that I was even like, oh, I guess I can see it. For some reason, I was always on like kind of a Silent Hill undercurrent, what with the kind of the rusty, nowhere-looking stuff, and are the menu sounds basically Silent Hill sounds, or am I misremembering those?
They're kind of similar. So I think Silent Hill's menu sounds are kind of like just off-key like organ chords, and then Cultic's are it's like a little choir sample that's kind of like pitch shifted around. Yeah. But so Silent Hill, so the Resident Evil 4 comparison that people make is and from my end, it's more of a gameplay design thing than like a world aesthetics. So it's more of the design of Resident Evil 4's combat is it's very mechanical. There's not a lot of like RNG baloney going on in that game. So like all of the gameplay systems can be learned and they can be mastered. And if you're proficient at them, then even the hardest difficulty is pretty manageable. And that was a big objective with Cultic's gameplay as well, was like the way the enemies are designed and the way that combat's designed is it's you've got a bit of like crowd control, and then a lot of it's just like getting used to enemy patterns, because enemies follow the same patterns. Their timings change a little bit with difficulty, but every enemy is they're gonna pathfind, they're gonna aim, they're gonna shoot, and then they're gonna repeat, and all of those are very clearly telegraphed. And so once you kind of get used to enemy patterns, you can kind of turn combat into it's almost just like solving like a puzzle in a way, and kind of getting into like a rhythm of it. And so lots of stuff from like the way that combat's designed to kind of the way that like ammo economy is managed, and then like the weapon upgrades. Like there's just a lot of influences from Resident Evil 4, and some of it's in the world design too, like the crusty locations and kind of the real world locations rather than like big Quake cathedrals and the stuff like that. There is a bit of that in there too, but yeah, mostly the Resident Evil 4 influence, a lot of it's just from like a gameplay design standpoint.
All right, everybody. Well, thanks so much for joining us for yet another episode of the Quad Damage Podcast, which I guess is more of a triple threat today, as it tends to be here before we kind of get back into our regular scheme of things. But thanks so much, Jason, for joining us today. Talk about your game. It's definitely probably one of my favorite. It's the one I've been the most hyped about it. They probably heard me every time they ask you, what boomer shoot are you excited about? I really have no interesting answer as far as like, it's either that or Turbo Overkill. And they're kind of like, sick. The same as always. All right, cool. But yeah, it was fun to go back into the actual build of it last night and kind of get caught up again. Very excited for Chapter 2. Definitely one of the kind of the retro shooters, or whatever you want to call them, those retro styled indie games. I think is certainly the most hyped for, and I think a lot of us are too. So much appreciated for you coming on here and telling us about it, because you usually don't get to hear that kind of when you said integer, I was like, okay, we're talking real stuff here now. Let's get down.
We're gonna talk about numbers. Here we go. It's the only math term I know, don't worry.
No, like it was kind of awesome, because it was exactly what I'm always wondering, like, why does this feel good, or why does this feel fair? Why do I feel like I'm getting away with just enough to where it feels realistic? And you're talking about the randomization between the two outcomes, that kind of thing. That was pretty cool.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, I'll talk about stuff like that for hours. Our friend here will never get any sleep.
Right. So on that note, so we can not get in the troubles, I'm High Functioning Medium. You can find me on Twitter at High Funk Medium, YouTube at High Functioning Medium, Patreon, as you would expect, patreon.com/ or whatever it is, High Functioning Medium. Robert, where can they find you?
Well, HyperVerse can be found on YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter is primarily your main platforms. And I would say that on your chosen platform, keep your eye out, because we have a major announcement coming up within the next few days. Yeah.
All right, Jason, where can they find you and anything related to what you're working on that you would like to share?
So you can find me on Twitter at Jasozz Games, and then I also have the Jasozz Games Discord, which there's a link to in my Twitter, which is that's where I go to talk about Cultic and guns and post pictures of our pets and all the things that I get in trouble for going off topic on if I do it on the 3D Realms Discord. So
the unmoderated feed.
That's right.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, that's all. As they say, keep on booming, and we'll see you next time.
Keep on booming. One day we'll get it right and say it together.
Keep on booming.